Good morning again. My name is Caroline Cummings. I'm the Executive Director of Oregon RAIN, and I'm really excited that you all joined us today. We're already working with some of you as communities. Some of you are new to Oregon RAIN and new to Community Lending Works. So we're really glad that you're able to take some time this morning to just learn more about emergency loan funds. I know some of you have already implemented them. Some of you are in the process of it. And some of you are most of you are on to learn about this process. So before we jump into the program part with Lynn, I wanted to share a few intro slides with you all. So hopefully you're all able to see my slides on there. Please keep yourself muted just for now, just to cut out background noise, but this is meant to be interactive. We want to hear from you. So if you do want to comment, either unmute yourself or raise your hand or post something in the chat and we'll respond to you. But today we're here to talk about how to develop emergency loan funds for your community. I already introduced who I am. Lynn will introduce himself momentarily, but we're super excited to have Lynn Meyer, the Director of Lending with Community Lending Works, with us today. My team is also on the line. Jennifer Damiani is our Development Director and Director of Operations. And then the team along the bottom are our Rural Venture Catalysts. Corey represents Lynn and Benton counties. Ariel represents Florence, Coburg, and Cresswell. And I know that some of your communities are on as well. Stephanie is Grant County. And then Raj is also with Little Lane, Oak Ridge, Lowell, and Veneta. So you've got a lot of support on the call today, here to help you and here to learn from each other, as many of you are already doing this. We are recording the session so that we can share it with you afterwards. There were also several cities and economic development professionals who wanted to join but weren't able to, so we'll make sure to get them the recording. And real quick, who we are a nonprofit. Our mission is to partner with Oregon communities like yourselves, and we really do three things. Ultimately, we're trying to build the next generation of economies, and we do that through catalyzing entrepreneurial ecosystems and economies. And we're really good at finding and connecting entrepreneurs to the critical resources that they need, whether it's people, talent, mentors, programs, accelerators, workshops, capital, whether it's loans, equity, or crowdfunding, or even grants, and then physical assets, which could be kitchen incubators, lab space, or co-working space. And we also couldn't do what we do if it wasn't for these communities inviting us in. We only go where we're invited. We've been invited to date to serve 20 cities across 5 counties, all funding us. Thank you for those who are on. 3 private foundations, Ford Family, Oregon Community Family, and Collins, several private corporations, and even the federal government. We received $300,000 from the federal government to catalyze a seed fund to invest equity in your communities. And we selected Cascade Seed Fund out of Bend to grow that fund. And they've currently raised $6 million, and they are actively deploying that capital in your region. Those are not loans, those are actual equity investments. And now I'm honored and privileged to turn it over to Lynn Meyer, a good friend who's leading Community Lending Works. He'll talk a little bit about what he does, and then please post comments. We'll interact as he goes. Lynn, I'll hand it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Carolyn, for having me. Really privileged to be able to share what we've learned. And before I get started, I want to call out 2 people, because these were people that were early in the trenches of the Emergency Loan Fund. First one is with Austin, with Lane County, and Seth with City of Albany. We were the first loan fund to launch emergency funds in the state. And to be honest, it was early on, and sometimes it felt like we were riding the bike and building it at the same time. The good news is we came up with a pretty successful program and were able to deploy the capital. So a little bit about us. Community Lending Works is a CDFI. We love acronyms in the nonprofit world, so I'll explain what a CDFI is. It's a community development financial institution. So in the truest sense, we are a community development loan fund. We help provide capital to both individuals and businesses that traditionally can't find it. We launched the fund in late 2011. I've honestly lost track because of all the emergency loans, but we are probably closing in on about 1,800 loans that we funded since we launched in late 2011. We serve primarily a 7-county area, and that's only a designation through the Department of Treasury. but we are allowed to lend anywhere in the state. You see the 7 counties, and those are our primary counties, but we can lend anywhere in the state. And our focus has been providing capital to both rural and urban communities. When you think about the work that we do, for the most part, is up and down the I-5 corridor and over to the coast, and we're starting to lend just a little bit in Central Oregon. One of the exciting things that we've been able to harness over the last couple of years is not only our funding sources, but we've been an approved USDA RMAP lender, and that's providing small business capital to rural communities with less than 25,000 in population. So as we start to think through these emergency loan funds, I'll try to layer this in as we talked this morning, of the encouraging thoughts of what is your community looking for revitalization or relaunch capital? Because now, from when Austin and Seth and I really dove in early on, it was, we were in the thick of it. We didn't know what was going to come or how long this was going to last. Part of that is still true, but now we know that the fog is starting to lift to some degree, and we need to start thinking about revitalization capital as well as emergency capital for our community. So it's more of a dual conversation that's starting to happen now. So hopefully you can see, as we move on to the next slide, some of the communities that we've worked in. Community Lending Works is really kind of unique. There's about 12 CDFIs within the state, give or take, and it can be loan funds, banks, credit unions, venture capital funds, but we've been able to provide this by really providing 2 primary platforms of lending, and that's what makes this unique. And I see we went back to slide, but I know where we're at, is that we have consumer loans. And a lot of people say, well, how does consumer loans work with the small business community? Historically, it's been really important. We provide credit builder loans, some personal loans, and auto loans. And really, a lot of times we see that entrepreneur that needs an auto loan, but they don't necessarily qualify through their bank. So we're able to provide that capital as well. The bulk of the work that we do is in the small business sector. And we do loans anywhere from a few $100s up to $100,000. From time to time, we've been able to go above that, but the bulk of the work that we do is what we would classify as micro, and the truth is it's below 50,000. So you can see that continuum of lending is quite broad. The last category, which is kind of separated from our pie graph, is one that we've jumped into the last year and actually have even continued to do a little bit since the COVID crisis, is a little bit in the affordable housing arena. And that's more of helping developers secure land as they start to think about affordable housing going forward. So those are kind of really our 3-legged stool. And the next one really leads into our next slide, is one, as a CDFI, we try to provide technical assistance where we can, but more importantly, we try to partner with people that are experts in that field to provide technical assistance, because that's really the secret sauce that makes a community development loan fund work. So as we build emergency loan funds, I wanted to bring up kind of 4 key points that we keep in mind that are foremost in our mission and what we do, is finding key partners and stakeholders. And I think that goes from early on in the emergency loan funds, is finding people that can be champions of not only the work that we do, but have the same mission and mindset of how do we help the small business ecosystem in the communities that we work. Building credibility and trust is really important, because our borrowers want to know that they have a partner in this process, not just a lender. And I think that will become apparent as I explain a little bit of how we've approached these emergency loan funds. It's a little different than normal, but it's really building that partnership. And again, providing services to these small businesses during this crisis that are more than just capital. It's that support network. And again, the last one before we jump into what we're all here to talk about is making sure that we collaborate, we create funding pools where we can. Because I know one of the confusions for a lot of small business that we talk to is, where do I turn? I feel like there's all these different avenues I need to go, and there's confusion. So as we move forward with this project, just try to collaborate where we can, provide technical assistance where we can up front, so the application process is a little bit more streamlined, so there's not 100 different portals that people are looking for assistance through the state, as well as make sure they get the assistance up front so when they make application, whether it be through us, through you, or any other program that's out there, they put their best foot forward and they've got a pretty concise, clear story of what's needed. So those are my overview slides of where we're at.
Great. Thank you, Lynn. Really appreciate it. And I'm glad that Seth from Albany and Austin from Lane County were able to join us today as well. And I know they were willing to take a couple of minutes to talk about what it's been like to build an emergency loan fund with you. So Seth, I know you had to hop off first. So do you mind taking the stage?
Sure, I'd be happy to, just for a couple of minutes. And I actually moved an appointment around and found a recording for one of the webinars I was going to join, so I'll stay on to answer questions throughout the session if that's helpful.
Thank you.
Well, hi everybody. My name is Seth Sherry. I'm the Economic Development Manager at the City of Albany. Welcome to my home office. My kids have become experts at picking the lock on my door, so if they come in, don't be too surprised. I've gotten over it for sure. I guess I just say a couple of things about our process of setting up an emergency loan fund. A few reflections, and like I said, happy to answer questions as they come up. We were in a really strange time. Well, we're all in a strange time, and it gets stranger by the day, despite some of the clarity. We were really in a position to try to look for creating a bridge loan fund that would help folks get through that really ambiguous period before any federal money started flowing at all. And we happened to be in a fairly privileged position because we had a pot of money that was dedicated towards economic development and that did not come from our general fund. So we had a little bit of money to work with. And as we were really thinking closely about what would be most helpful at the time, it seemed like cash was the answer. And we needed a partner organization that could be nimble and administer that cash quickly. And we had that in Community Lending Works. I know there's a number of CDFIs around the state. There's at least 3 in the Portland metro area that I'm aware of who are trying to stand up or have done similar programs. But we had an ongoing relationship with Community Lending Works. I'd sent many businesses there in the past and knew they could be trusted. And one of the things that we really valued about the structure that they had set up previously with Lane County that we altered somewhat, but one of the key elements from my perspective was that by providing a loan, it required touch points with Community Lending Works and their resource partners, who are also our resource partners. As Lynn mentioned, the fact that they would have touch points that could provide or help them with technical assistance or other services that they may need to meet their emergency response plan, which is one of the key elements of this loan, was that they had to come up with a response plan, emergency response plan, how they were going to use this money and other resources that they may get in the future to help keep the doors open or be able to reopen once the time came. And I'll just say that one more time. One of the key factors for us was that they had already or were intending on pursuing primarily the 2 federal resources, the big ones that we all know about, the EIDL loans and PPP loans, that this wasn't meant to be a source of money that would hold them over in and of itself. That wasn't the intention. And by and large, we had a great response. The people who did apply were very thoughtful with their applications, put a lot of work into thinking how they'd use and leverage these funds to access others and try to recover when the opportunity provided itself. So, and I'll just say one more thing. We launched that loan program the same weekend that many of the federal funds started becoming available. And we're now looking, the funds were exhausted in the first round. We took applications for a few days and then the funds were completely exhausted. We capitalized it with $200,000. We're looking at recapitalizing it now, probably with a more targeted subset of businesses that we'd be looking at. We essentially opened it to everybody who fit the small business category or definition, but we're looking at recapitalizing it with some CDBG money that we have. And it's been difficult to know who and what we should be targeting exactly. And despite the fact that there's a litany of surveys out there, as many of you know, it's been unclear on how much information we'll get from, say, the Business Oregon and Travel Oregon surveys and SBDC surveys that were done, or when that will come. So we had to do another one recently had pretty good response to say, hey, what do you need currently, business? What's your outlook over the next couple of months? What does recovery look like for you? And what sorts of things would be most helpful to support you, whether financial or other resources that we may be able to bring to the table. So with that, I'll finish up. And if there's questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thanks, Seth. Appreciate that. And you made a good point about, the timing of when your funds came out, because we're connected to hundreds of entrepreneurs around the state, and most of them did not receive either the EIDL up to 10K forgivable grant or the Paycheck Protection. And the ones who did, many of them are afraid to spend the money because they're still, it's not clear around the guidelines on what it could be used for and what timeline, and they're worried about having to pay it back. So a lot of them are looking for funding from their local cities and counties like yours. So thank you for taking the time to share that, Seth.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's turn it over to Austin, and then there are questions coming in that we want to get to.
Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Austin Ramirez, and I'm Lane County's Community and Economic Development Manager. I'll start by talking about what it's like working with Lynn and the Community Lending Works team. It's been an amazing partnership. Lynn and I were having conversations maybe a few months before COVID about setting up a Lane County sort of loan program that was much needed then, right? Access to capital for entrepreneurs and small businesses was a problem before. It was sort of a chronic issue, and when COVID happened, it became an emergency issue. And so we were lucky to have started some conversations before, so it wasn't like restarting a new partnership. What was amazing though is, Lynn and I had a conversation, and he had clearly been thinking about this issue for a long time. And so it felt like we didn't have to recreate the wheel. They sort of had a program in mind with sort of those touch points that Seth mentioned and some other things built into it that made it really easy for the public agencies, Lane County, Eugene, and Springfield to contribute to that fund. And I don't want to underestimate that fact, because it can be really hard to move 3 bodies of elected officials in one direction. And the fact that we were able to do that within days, I think, was really amazing. And largely due to Community Lending Works' ability to be a CDFI and to be a really successful one. And I think we're very lucky to have them in our backyard, essentially. And so I always am sure to thank Community Lending Works, and really am so grateful for everything they've done for our community. I think, we were one of the first in the state, or maybe the first in the state, to set up a program like this in response to COVID. So there was some risk involved, not gonna lie. We were sort of unsure, but looking back, I'm really glad we did it as early as we did, because it took so much longer for the federal resources to hit the ground than anyone expected. And so our 3 agencies capitalized the loan fund with $400,000, and that was gone immediately. And our wait list has continued to grow. So we weren't able to help every business, obviously, but we were able to help several. And I think seeing how what ours was intended to be, which was sort of bridge capital, seeing how that bridge got extended longer and longer as we've had issues with federal dollars, I'm really glad that we would help the businesses we could, and that we put this in place. I think similar to Seth, we're looking at potentially recapitalizing, but hopefully doing that in a way that targets and maybe focuses more on those businesses that truly need resources. I think, we've seen some systemic issues in how federal and state and public resources are rolled out that were sort of hard to think about in the moment, and we need to be better about that and apply an equity perspective. And so those are conversations that are ongoing with our leadership. I think, if I compare ours to what Seth did and Albany did, one of the things I really like about theirs was the sort of lottery that they implemented in it. So while we did sort of first come, first serve, they did, from my understanding, Seth, like an initial review of applications, and then those that were eligible were put into sort of a lottery system. Is that right?
Yeah, that is right. And we really struggle with the idea of equitability too. And our solution to both meeting immediate need and not delaying it like 3 weeks or a month to getting funds out the door was to have an application period. We did 5 days. And within that period, all complete applications were reviewed and then selected through a lottery, basically.
Yeah, so I really like that idea. If anybody's looking to start a program, there are reasons why someone may not be able to hear this information as early as someone else, or even access a computer or the equipment you need to submit for this. And so I think building in a longer application period is great. And then I also think the idea of a lottery is great because it's just a lot more fair and equitable, and it helps cancel out some of the reasons that would prevent certain types of entrepreneurs or populations from accessing the resources quicker. So again, I'm happy to answer any questions. I'll stay on and stay with you guys.
Thanks, Austin. Appreciate it. There are a few questions coming in, and I just want to say that we've seen several entrepreneurs that we work with applying and receive those funds within days. So we really appreciate how quickly you guys are moving on deploying that capital. It's very, very critical. Okay, a question to open up to the group. Kelly's wondering, what are some of the suggested funding sources within municipal finances that funding could come from? Are there any out-of-the-box suggestions?
Well, I'll just say real quick, I don't know how out of the box it is, but we are looking at recapitalizing with CDBG dollars directly tied to those who typically are served by those monies and would need to meet the metrics for that money as well. So that limits the pool significantly. But in reality, if you employ people who don't receive special training or don't have a college degree, it typically applies, and we think about job retention, it applies too. So if you got access to that, I would explore that. I know counties, if you have lottery dollars, that's been the other most typical source that folks have looked towards. But I will just say too, the risk is real here. Austin mentioned it. The risk is real because we all have limited resources. And I would be at this point super thoughtful about what you're spending when. And I know Lynn and I have talked about this quite a bit, this idea of keeping the powder dry. Recovery is not clear as of yet when in the timeline that looks like. And I think that you have to be brave as a community leader to maybe say, if we do have this much money, it's finite and we're not sure quite best how to use it. And if you have to say no for now, I would say do that, because there really is a limited amount of money, and we have yet to see much substantively flow from the state yet either.
Yeah. Or Austin, did you want to also chime in on that? Or
yeah, so I think from counties, lottery dollars is what we use to capitalize ours. The two cities, Eugene and Springfield, use different sources. I've heard of issues with using urban renewal dollars because it's sort of geographically attached. I've heard of more interest in CDBG, like Seth is saying, but it requires some metrics. I think the ideal, and Lynn can chime in, is we needed to be able to provide low recourse money to community lending works, and we essentially granted that knowing the risk involved. And I also want to clarify that while it was lottery dollars, these were lottery dollars that had been allocated and dedicated to other projects throughout the year. So it wasn't like we found a secret pot of money. We had to push back a lot of other projects. And so it was the question of, okay, if we're saying yes to this, what are we saying no to? And in that moment, we decided to say yes to that, and I'm glad we did. But to Seth's point, be very considerate about how you're spending finite resources, especially because if we're being honest, recovery probably looks like an 18 to 24 month process, and we're all going to take huge hits to our revenues at local and state levels. So anything you can do if you do implement a loan or a grant program, please continue talking to Lynn about how to craft that in a way that decreases your risk as much as possible.
Great. And Matt also has a good question about some of the logistics associated with the loan. So Lynn, this question would be for you. As someone who services this loan and is managing the distribution of it, what are some of the fees involved? And if you can talk a little bit more about, let's say several of the cities on this call wanted to band together because some can only put in 5,000, some can put in 25 or 50 and higher. Could you talk a little bit more about the logistics?
Sure. One thing that I want to say is we're very flexible. The end goal, and we say this with every conversation, end goal is to get the capital in the hands of the folks that need it the most. That being said, we only have limited bandwidth, even though we've got a lot of horsepower and we've got a lot of energy to do it. We wanted to be thoughtful of not taking on a lot of really small loan funds. And it's not because they're not important. It's just looking at the capacity of servicing those and deploying the capital. Right now, and I'll say right now, and again, we're flexible, this is part of this conversation, we had set a minimum threshold of $100,000 to take on the loan fund. And part of it is the worst thing that we can do to our small business community sometimes is undercapitalize them. So we wanted to make sure that the loan amounts that we were providing were meaningful and impactful that they could move forward with. But that being said, you know, one of the ideas, and I know Caroline and I have talked about it, is how could we collaborate other communities and other pools to make it a cleaner portal that people can apply through and be able to leverage their money. I think one of the things to be thoughtful as we're learning more literally every day and every hour is that the state of Oregon has allocated money to go to the small business community, and they're going to hopefully deploy most of that capital through the CDFI networks. But what we are hearing is that there's probably going to be a leveraging component. So as we start to put money in emergency loan funds, if communities can be thoughtful to meet some of the qualifying metrics so they could qualify as leveraged capital. And the two that are coming out, and again, it is a very fluid conversation, we're knowing more every day, is that there's two benchmarks, is that there's a maximum of 25 FTEs, and that's based on year-end 2019 numbers for your applicants, and that the borrower cannot have received any government sources like PPP or EIDL or currently be approved. It's what they want to make sure they do is address that gap, that people that are not able to access those funds that are out there. But to go back to the logistics, I think the key thing to keep in mind is to be thoughtful of the capital you're putting in, try to identify the communities that you're going to serve. And again, we can talk more if need be of really the realistic risk threshold, but is there a like type community that you can partner with, that you can make a simple portal for people to apply through and leverage those funds? Because that could really mean more. And I want to say a daily, a weekly, a monthly, as other programs come available, the more we can pool funds to leverage, the more it's able to access additional funds, whether we know of them now or we will know of them in the future.
Yeah, and I don't know if anybody's on from Coburg or the Coburg Community Foundation. I know they had signed up, but one of the things that they're doing is actually their city council just approved $50K for a grant up to $5K, no more than $5K per company. And what Coburg, actually, is there anybody on from Coburg who wants to jump in before I speak on your behalf? Okay. What they're doing is they've asked us to put an application together. We borrowed from what Community Lending Works is doing, so thank you, Lynn, for helping with that. And the Community Foundation is getting the money, and it's a new foundation for their small community. There's just a few thousand people in Coburg, and they're going to issue the funds, and we're working with them on making sure the companies are actually ready to receive those funds. So Lynn, could you share a little bit about, and or Seth and Austin, about how important it is that these businesses work with different technical service providers, whether it's us or the SBDC, to make sure that they're submitting a good application, and once they do receive the funds, that they're spending them appropriately, so you're not throwing, good money after bad money.
Correct. And I'll jump in early because I think one thing that I want to explain, because it might help provide a little bit of clarity, is just real quickly to go through the application process, because that ties directly in with the technical assistance. So what we've created was a very streamlined 2-page application with required documents to apply. And remember, the whole goal of this was to provide the barrier to entry relatively low, and if they are approved, to make the accountability fairly high going forward, because that's one of the things that's important with those touch bases. So the application specifically is a 2-page application, providing some financials, which is 2019 year-end financials. We don't need tax returns. If you've got profit and loss, that's great. And 2020 financials, and I'll go back and explain why we want those. But the best thing that they can provide, which is required, is an emergency plan. That emergency plan, again, can be different for every business, but it should address summary of changes that they've made to their business, whether it's a total shutdown or a scale back, talking about how they would utilize the funds, how they've addressed staffing, have they had to address supply chain issues, is it a marketing plan, how they would relaunch. So one thing that we're not doing is we're not writing those plans for them. Because if you can imagine, we don't want to be in a position of helping someone developing those plans and making a lending decision at the same time. And that's where technical assistance comes in. And specifically, if they're working with SBDC or Oregon Rain, is to be really, really thoughtful of how they're going to utilize these funds and providing an emergency plan. And what we have found is most business owners have a really good thoughtful plan in their head. It's getting it out and putting it on paper, because there's a couple of key things. First and foremost, we want to make sure that we're not duplicating funding sources. So they shouldn't be using this for payroll if they received a PPP, which again is that kind of leverage exclusion. But the reality is this is not meant to be a silver bullet. It's not meant to be a stopgap of loss of income. It's to pay for business expenses only and not personal expenses. And I know sometimes that's a hard thing to say from a humanitarian side, but we have to make sure that the money that they receive is doing two things. And I think when Austin and I jumped in earlier, we probably were even looking at one thing, was survival. Now we're making sure that the business is in a place to utilize some of this capital to survive, whether that's clearing up some vendor accounts, paying a little bit of back rent after they've negotiated with their landlord, but starting to have a little bit of that capital, depending on the loan amounts, of having a little bit of dry powder as they start to launch forward, because that's really, really important. Because if you take your normal restaurant, they've been closed long enough now, they've had to go through most of their stock, they've had to dispose of it, so they're going to really be starting from scratch. And that could be thousands and thousands of dollars. So they want to make sure that they clear up some of their current costs right now, but to be able to move forward. But as far as the technical assistance, I can't recommend enough for an application window, because it gives people to have a little bit of time to work on this, to be more thoughtful. Because for us, and I'm going to bring the first experience that Austin and I jumped into this, we jumped in early. And again, hindsight is 2020. I like the version we did with City of Albany better, but it's because we didn't know better at the time. We just wanted to jump in. To give you a little bit of an idea of what happened is that we made a press release on a Thursday afternoon with the thoughtful idea that we were going to tell people that applications were going to go live on our website Sunday at noon. You know, a few people didn't follow the rules. They applied before, which was okay. We communicated back. Sunday at noon rolled around. In the first 15 minutes, we had over 100 applications. And by 9 o'clock that night, when I stopped working, we had over 200. The next morning, we had over 250. Now, as we sifted through those, we've got down to about a total of 178 applicants, because people were applying multiple times. They were also throwing in applications of, here's my application, and now here's my financials. So it really kind of bogged down the system. So what I would say is partnering with technical service providers and TA is incredibly important, because we have set a rule of we will only accept completed applications up front. Now, in the event that we have undeployed funds, we will reach back out and say, hey, can you send us these documents? But we want to be fair and equitable, and we want to give them that thoughtful time. So that's where working with folks like Carolyn and her team at SBDC, because a lot of the business owners have been very thoughtful, but they just need a little bit of help and a little bit of assistance with putting that application together. And expediency doesn't win in this scenario. Thoughtfulness and making sure you have a complete scenario is going to increase the odds of successful applications, whether it's through us, SBA, or any other program out there. Everybody's looking at it from a similar type of lens.
Great. Thank you, Lynn. And I know that Michelle and Cresswell wanted to ask a question, but before we get to you, Michelle, Corey on my team wants to throw up a poll real quick. We want to just kind of get a gauge about where you guys are and what you're thinking, if you don't mind taking that.
Hey, Caroline, while he's going through that, can I just say something about your original question?
Sure.
And I think this maybe speaks to a couple of Matt's questions too up in Estacada. Hey, Matt. The balance of risk and trying to choose and support businesses that are going to survive and getting the funds out there is a really difficult thing when you're thinking about emergency funds. And I know I see some nodding heads out there. It's a hard position to be in, to say we don't want to be overly burdensome in the application process and vetting people but want to look at a couple key metrics. And I think that Community Lending Works did a really good job of figuring out what the most clutch and important, quickly available metrics were for looking at success, and we trust them wholly. Matt, you asked who's guaranteeing the loans, and in the case of Lane County and the partners down there, Springfield, they essentially used the money as a grant. They didn't expect to get it back, and they weren't guaranteed, and there's no collateral asked for. In our case, we did not ask for personal collateral either, and we essentially are acting as the guarantee, although we are asking that principal that's repaid get brought back to us essentially as a revolving loan fund, rather than just going back into, well, just not being returned to the city. So.
Great, thank you, Seth.
Yeah.
And thank you guys for taking the poll. Looks like 43% of you are thinking about launching an emergency fund. About 20% of you are in the process. 10% have launched an emergency fund, and 5% of you are not. So thank you guys. Oh, and 24% are not sure at this point yet. So thanks for taking the time to do that. Michelle in Cresswell, did you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and share what your city's doing and what you're looking for?
Sure. You know, we're a small city, 5,000, so we don't have a lot of capital to put into a fund. We've already, you know, had a really great conversation with Lynn Meyer, I really, you know, wish we had $100,000, because I think he has a great way of assisting small businesses. But so we did approach our community foundation, and they are not up to actually doing a loan fund. And I see this as an opportunity not only to help our businesses now, but to really jumpstart a microloan process here in Cresswell. So I'm looking at it not only for short term, but long term. And, you know, after talking with Austin, I think he provided some excellent insight into the fact that, you know, we want to do a loan, whether they get paid back or not, just to sort of set that expectation that we expect you to succeed. We're not just giving you money right now as a Band-Aid. You know, we want to give you a loan because we want to give you the encouragement you need right now. It's going to be very small, but, you know, we think that these small loans could also help a lot of our small businesses who might have very small, you know, needs for restarting, such as, you know, hair salons. They may need to purchase PPE and things like that, and they haven't been operating. So they've been living off of their savings. So they might not have much, but they may not need much either. And the city wants to be there as a partner to help them come back to Main Street. And so we're not looking at helping large restaurants. I think most of our restaurants in town have really dialed into the takeout. We have some great restaurants here in Cresswell, by the way. And they have tremendous people running them, and they've been here through thick and thin already. You know, we're not looking at big businesses. We're really looking at those microloans and those small businesses that are on Main Street that are shuttered right now. You know, massage therapists. I just don't know what their needs are going to be. We have a little grocery store that has done a tremendous amount of work to go online so that people can order their orders and pick them up at the curb. You know, I would like for her to have access to some capital if she needs that for technology improvements or whatever, you know, she might need to help her over this hump of a time when, you know, she wasn't expecting on expanding in this area. You know, there's just a lot of ways I think we can take a small amount of money and we can leverage that long term into a microloan program. I think, you know, once my council is committed to a microloan program, we will be able to capitalize it a little bit more every year. So while we might not have much right now because we're scraping together money that, you know, we were going to hire someone. So we're scraping together that money from this year's budget, because obviously we didn't hire them this year, to put aside for this. Maybe next year we'll actually have, you know, a budget to capitalize it even further. But, you know, I'm open to any partnerships anybody would like to put together for a microloan program that maybe we could, you know, put together through Community Lending Works or anyone who would be willing to do the lending part. You know, we're not experts on this, and our community foundations don't know how to do it, but we do have some money and we do have a heart for starting this up. That's, I guess, all I have to say.
That was perfect. Thank you, Michelle. And I think that a lot of people are probably feeling the same way, you know, not having enough to actually do the hunt to meet the minimum or the close to the minimum. So I'm really glad that you made the ask. Are there other folks willing right now to talk about banding together and joining Cresswell and putting a larger fund together? And again, Lynn, can you talk about, let's say Cresswell puts in 30, Harrisburg puts in 10, Coburg puts in 20, whatever, right? Like a bunch of communities put funding together. Can you talk about how you make sure that those funds get to those communities?
Sure. And I think we saw that firsthand with the very first fund that we launched. So what we're able to do is when the applications come in, we sort them by geographic region and then process them from that standpoint. And then in Austin's case, what we did is kind of unique. We had Lane County as the overarching funder, and then we had cities of Eugene and Springfield. So we really set up thresholds and concentration risks. And not only the city and the county were seeing their dedicated funds going to the areas they wanted to do, but we able kind of, in the county scenario, we said, okay, we want X percentage to go to northern, eastern, western, southern counties. So it was a true equal collaboration, and we set those thresholds early on. So in the mindset of, again, I'm making up something, but if you were to take Oak Ridge, Cottage Grove, and Cresswell, it would collaborate together on a pool, we could easily do that. We could say, great, this makes sense, let's do it. The money goes dedicated for those communities and split it up, you know, whatever, a third, however it is. But we've done that a couple of times. We're doing that right now in Central Oregon. That's launching tomorrow. And that one off the top of my head, and I'm waiting from an email, here is right now it's 5 communities that are into one pool, and it most likely will be 6 by the end of the day, but it's all through one portal. And the same thing, we're just gonna scrub the applications, sort them by geographic area, and then kind of start the review and the underwriting process. It really, I don't want to say it's easy, but it's kind of easy. That's the beautiful thing about Excel. You can just kind of throw them in there, sort them out, and then we start diving in.
Great, thank you. And I know Riley Hoagland, Lincoln City Councilor, and also an entrepreneur and inventor, had a question as well. Go ahead, Riley.
What? It's not a question. Well, I guess suppose, but you know, we're here. We just put together a COVID relief program for the lodging and non-lodging using the transient room tax to the tune of $635,000 with potential payment plan for the water and billing for businesses. You know, and that's only for businesses that have been in operation for a year. And we're struggling as a council and as the community as a whole of how to vet the businesses and how much and all of that. So it's interesting that there's thanks for letting me be a part of this, because I didn't know all this was going on. And it's kind of something that we are only looking at trying to fix here for our own community due to the fact that a lot of these businesses didn't receive funds. And so fortunately, you know, we have the transient room tax, and that's our monthly amount that we received was $635,000. So that's why we're using that. And, you know, it's still, you know, that was just Monday. I don't know what day is today, but, you know, we're trying to figure out how to give that money to people and how to businesses, you know, and what those are going to be used for. So I don't know, you know, Lincoln City is not really a part of RAIN, and I don't believe any of this. I know maybe Lynn or Seth, you guys know, I don't know, but, you know, it would be great if we could participate in something and I could advocate for that in that way of like, hey, here's also something to go so that we're not alone at Lincoln City doing this all by ourselves at this, you know, it's being a small town and the vetting process. I'm trying to remove somebody picking what businesses get how much. And we're kind of tied to goods and services purchased by the businesses, and that's not the same as here's $5,000, but it's I need to buy $5,000 worth of gift certificates from you. So it's very different that way, and it's only for businesses again that have been in operation for a year. So I'm open to, you know, taking information to council as far as like, hey, here's other opportunities for us to participate in.
Lynn, you want to take that?
Yeah, I wanted to take that. And I think leads into a really good conversation about evaluation, deployment, and quite frankly, risk of how do we think about those. So, I mean, what I would say is whether it be us or another CDFI in the state or whether it be another re-lender, this is kind of what we do. You know, for us, I've been doing this for 20 years, but Community Lending Works is going on 10 years of doing this. So this is kind of what we do. This is in just a little bit different lens. And you're right. The question is, how do we, once we develop these programs, how do we evaluate, how do we underwrite it, then how do we get the money into the hands in businesses in a meaningful time frame? I know both with the Lane County Fund and with Albany Fund, we went from the day that the applications closed to sorting, underwriting, approving, deploying, and ACHing into borrowers' accounts within 3 to 5 days. Within an Austin scenario, granted, I worked Sunday till 9 o'clock at night, but when Monday, the real business day, rolled around, by Friday of that week, all of our money had hit our borrowers' accounts and was done. It was out. So, I mean, obviously, that takes a much bigger staff than just me. I've got amazing people that work for me, and I'm very proud of the work that they're doing. But it's because this is somewhat similar to what we do, and we set some really clear and transparent benchmarks. As an example that I'll share, we asked for 2019 financials, and the reason we asked for that is that borrower needs to be positive net cash flow as the end of 2019, because if they were negative, one could argue they were facing some challenges in the first place.
Right.
And one of the other scenarios that people have come up to is, well, what if they were negative? Well, we've addressed that a couple different ways. One, maybe they had a capital expenditure at the end of the year and we add that back and that puts in net positive, so thumbs up, that clears that benchmark. The other scenario we've ran into, especially with smaller communities, some of them have faced fires over the last year from the forest fires. They've had flooding issues. So we could look at that through a lens to where maybe we subtract that out of that year and get on a goal where they were showing a trajectory of net positive income. And then we asked for 2020 financials just to kind of get an idea of where they were pre-COVID, so we could work with our TA providers and the borrower to help them to scale back. So that just gives you a little bit of an insight of why we are asking for those things. So if you're going to do your own evaluation, here's the thing. You cannot underwrite a loan to the 10th degree during these challenging times. It's actually almost impossible. What you're trying to do is pick some solid benchmarks, some solid metrics to be able to evaluate. And quite frankly, I'm just going to tell you real quickly what you want to do. And you can put your own lens on it. Make sure the application is complete. Make sure they've got up-to-date financials that are positive net income that we just addressed. They've got, a proper accounting systems that can produce financials, and that they have a thoughtful and understandable action plan. Does it make sense to you? Because somebody said it earlier, we want to fund the people that have the most likelihood to be successful going forward. The last thing that we've done is we have pulled credit on our borrowers. And a lot of people would say, how do you evaluate credit in these challenging times? Because you could have a 700 credit score today, and 6 weeks from now, you can have a 500 credit score. Well, first of all, we're not looking at the credit report from a score perspective. We're just trying to see, is there any major red flags that jump out that could impede their ability to leverage capital as they go forward? Sometimes there's a couple bumps in the road and we're okay with that. But we address that as part of the monthly check-ins. So when they are ready to address their credit union or their bank or other sources of capital as they come out of this, maybe they've addressed this. If there was something just crazy scary, we'd want to know about it, because we want to make sure that the money is utilized, because our communities and our funders and municipalities don't have an endless pool of money. So maybe that's a screening metric that you would want to look at as well. And does that really help to address some of your questions?
Yeah, absolutely. I've tried to state those needs for the 2019, 2020 to show that process, and it's really kind of a hard sale there. It's more about getting the money right away. And it's like, well, yeah, I understand that. And also there's a process for it. So I've yet to know what we're doing. We might have another subcommittee. So we had a subcommittee about how to develop the program of the relief or the voucher program or whatever the title is because of legalities. But we might also then have another subcommittee to determine who gets what and by how much. But absolutely, I'm in favor. And I've been subcommittees of other grants of outside agency requests. And so, complete application. I appreciate, showing last year's to show that, hey, you were out successful and this isn't more of a windfall. So that's a good point. But yeah, I mean, it's difficult, of course.
Thanks, guys.
Carolyn, can I address one last thing?
Yeah, go for it.
Is I want to, and Seth brought it up, and I think even Austin brought it up, is the reality of risk. And here is the best way that I can answer it. You're going to lose loans. And I know that's blunt. What percentage, nobody knows, but we're trying to be transparent. It could be anywhere between 10, 20, 30% of these businesses that won't survive. And that's hard to say, but it has to be part of the risk evaluation that when you're putting these funds available, we hope to lose as few as possible, not only from a loan fund performance side, but more importantly, from the stabilization of our communities. But the reality is we still have a lot of unknowns ahead of us. There's even a potential of the second wave, which scares us all to death. But we have to be realistic of how thoughtful we are of putting this capital out. And if you have X amount of funds, do you only earmark a percentage of that for this first round? Because the first round is going to be your highest risk, but also could be the most critical for stabilization. So I just want to be very transparent and very open to say, think through your risk tolerance, how important it is to your community, to your city, to your foundation to return, because the odds are it may not, or it may. Because we've got two couple different funding models. We've had some with grant, with Seth's we've had loans, some folks we've had loans where the principal and interest come up. So I don't want to quote exactly fees, but I mean, the range of fees is variables between 4 and 6%. And I know that was a question that came up, and it really depends on how the investment's structured. So we can take those offline and be really creative, because it's really going to be dependent on the funding source. But just know that we're fluid in those conversations, we're flexible, but risk is a real thing.
Thanks, Lynn. I can also share from some of the entrepreneur perspective, since that's what we're spending most of our days doing, triaging one-on-one with entrepreneurs who are really fearful about what's to come. Most of them, and I know Matt in Estacada, you were asking about what's the temperature like for entrepreneurs willing to, and business owners to take on debt. And I can tell you that many of them are more fearful about the SBA forgivable loans than they are about going after these community emergency loans. And I think it's because there's, faces behind these people that they can have a relationship with to help them. So they are interested in these kinds of loans. And I know Nikki and Roseburg, you were asking a really good question about reporting requirements. What do you require from the companies once the loan, is issued, that they have to provide back?
Great question, and I think this was brought up early, and this is probably the most exciting part of the program, because it's not your traditional loan. The loan terms are set at the following. It's a 2% interest rate for the first 6 months, and put an asterisk by that 6 months, where there's no payments required at all. The next 6 months are interest only, and then the remaining term, anywhere between 3 to 5 years, can be principal and interest payments. Here's the check-in point, is that we know as lenders, just as a whole, when you give somebody money and say you don't have to pay us for 6 months, you exponentially raise your risk that loan goes away. So what we've done is bring that accountability, is that they sign an agreement as part of the loan contract that they agree to meet with either one of our staff or our parent company, which is Dev Northwest, or depending on how big this gets, we may even pull in Oregon Rain and some other people to do monthly check-ins. And the monthly check-in is mandatory. And obviously, it's not going to be in person because of what's going on, but it could be via phone. It could be hopefully via Zoom or some other medium like that, is to check in on their emergency action plan. How's it going? Touch base, hold them accountable as far as, are you doing what you said you're going to do? But more importantly, for us to listen to identify technical assistance needs. Maybe they're struggling with some contracts and they need to get connected with legal help. Maybe they need to get some QuickBooks assistance or just some marketing help. And it's our job to take that charge to not just listen to them and spit information back, but to be able to be a connector of services. So it's really to be able to do that. And that's for the first 6 months is mandatory. The methodology or the theory is that people are probably not going to have as much time on their hands after the 6 months because they're going to be knee deep in running their business and working just an amazing amount of hours trying to relaunch. And I wanted to go back to the asterisk because we just did this for the first time. City of Yachats, which we launched yesterday, did a little smaller loan, but they didn't want payments for the first year. So we're kind of, every one of these have a lot of similarities, but there's just a little nuance. And I think Austin and Seth can probably shake their heads that we absolutely were open to as many modifications based on the city and the funders' requirements. But then again, we also have some baseline metrics that we have to stay along with as well.
Yeah, as we're coming up on time here, I wanted to also let you guys know that yesterday we hosted a Zoom session with U.S. Senator Wyden while he's in D.C. there. His staff had asked us to pull together rural entrepreneurs and minority entrepreneurs who have been passed over by a lot of these SBA federal funds. He wanted to hear directly from them, their stories. And we had 25 entrepreneurs show up, and 15 of them were actually able to share their personal stories about their frustrations with EIDL and PPP. And, you know, Senator Wyden was clearly frustrated. He did not hold that back. And he's asked us to help create what the new legislation should look like in round 3, right? Because there's already the coronavirus 3.5 or whatever they're calling it that's out right now, but there's going to be another tranche and wants some help with that. So I mention that because these community emergency loan funds are critical because these companies need this money right now. And if you look at the FEMA statistics on disasters, you know, once the disaster's lifted, they say that 90% of businesses, if they don't open their doors within 5 days after a disaster is lifted, they will fail. Now, we don't know how that's going to translate for this virus because what's the end of the disaster? We don't know, but those are frightening statistics. So appreciate you guys all being willing to chime in. I know I've already received several messages from folks wanting to band together with other cities. So I'll switch over to the screen really quick here and put Lynn's and my contact information up. If you want to reach out to us, please do. You can reach out to either of us. And I just want to say thank you. And thank you, Seth and Austin, for participating and sharing your experiences. I wish we had more time, but you know what? We're all at home working, so feel free to pick up the phone, reach out, and we would be more than happy to help you provide critical funding to the community, to the entrepreneurs in your community.